In 1963, a gang made up of 15 people devised a carefully crafted plan to carry out a train robbery. They succeeded in pulling off one of the largest heists in history, with loot valued at up to $90 million. The operation was planned with great cunning and intelligence and was extremely bold. Imagine they used military uniforms and vehicles. After the operation, an unprecedented chase between the police and the gang of thieves began, marking a unique moment in British history. Our story today is about a famous case in Britain known as the Great Train Robbery. Although the story dates back to the 1960s, what makes it especially fascinating is that the mastermind behind the operation, Bruce Reynolds, remained alive until 2013. Interviews and documentaries were later made in which the events can be heard directly from him. Bruce Reynolds will be the main character, despite the presence of many other important figures, including gang members and investigators. Don't be deceived by the appearance of the gray-haired man. He was one of the most cunning thieves in Britain, and his entire life was devoted to crime. 1 year before the train robbery, on November 27, 1962, Bruce and his gang carried out a famous robbery at London's Heathrow Airport. There were 7 of them, and they had learned that a large sum of money would be transported through the airport without heavy security. They entered the building wearing elegant clothing to avoid suspicion and slipped into the upper floors to monitor the street. Bruce waited in the car outside the building and signaled the gang members to move. Once the targeted shipment arrived, a metal box inside an armored vehicle. As soon as it arrived, they attacked the unarmed guards and easily took control of the shipment, transferring it to their cars and escaping quickly. After opening the box, they discovered that the amount was 62 pounds, 0 less than expected, but they still considered it a good haul. Bruce tried to calm the gang and reassured them that the next operation would be much bigger, the train robbery, which would bring an enormous payoff. Over the following months, Bruce and his gang were harassed by the police and summoned for questioning, but the evidence was not sufficient to convict them. They celebrated their success in slipping out of the police's grip. During this time, we are introduced to other important figures, such as Detective Frank Williams, who was monitoring the gang, and Brian Field, a corrupt lawyer who was well-connected in the criminal underworld and helped the gang with planning. After the airport robbery, Bruce and his gang began planning the major operation, the Great Train Robbery. They received information from a source inside the Railway Authority, whom we will later come to know as the Inside Agent. The train was traveling from Glasgow in Scotland to London in England. The second carriage behind the engine was the Royal Mail carriage, which contained a massive shipment of cash coming from Scottish banks. This money was known as surplus funds and was transported to London. In addition, any surplus money from cities the train passed through was also collected along the way. There were only 5 guards in the mail carriage, all of them postal workers with no armed security, while the rest of the train carried around 70 passengers in the other carriages. The gang realized this could be the opportunity of a lifetime. Bruce Reynolds and his men personally inspected the train and were astonished by the sheer size of the money bags inside the mail carriage. However, there were 2 major concerns. First, the mail belonged to the Queen, meaning any robbery would trigger an intense manhunt. And second, the large number of passengers could interfere with the operation. After days of surveillance, the gang gathered at Bruce's house to develop a detailed plan. First, they identified the perfect location to intercept the train, a rural area outside London, before the train reached its final station, near bridge number 127. At this point, the train would have collected the largest amount of cash and would be far from the eyes of the authorities. Second came the question, how to stop the train. Bruce decided that the best method was to manipulate the railway signals. There was a main signal on the large bridge, and a smaller preliminary signal on the ground about 1 kilometer before it. Changing the smaller signal from green to yellow would cause the train driver to prepare to stop at the main signal. Then switching the main signal to red would bring the train to a complete halt. Bruce enlisted an outside expert, Roger Corddry, known as the flower seller, who had experience tampering with trains. Roger was assigned to operate the main signal. while one of the gang members handled the smaller signal. A nearby farm close to Bridge 127 was chosen as the gang's operations base. The corrupt lawyer Brian Field was responsible for purchasing the farm on their behalf and for arranging a professional to clean it afterward and burn it to destroy any evidence. The plan began to take shape. The gang would wear military clothing to avoid suspicion, use military vehicles and a truck to transport the money quickly, and carry no firearms, relying only on batons to maintain control without escalating violence. Before carrying out the operation, Bruce and the gang conducted practice sessions, learning how to move train carriages on their own. They trained specifically on how to control the train, if needed, especially how to move the engine and the mail carriage toward the bridge. After stopping it at the signal, on the night of the operation, August 6, 1963, all members of the gang gathered at the farm. Their total number was 15 men, including Roger the flour seller and his crew. They put on fake military uniforms, covered their faces with masks, and armed themselves with batons. The objective was clear: to sneak to the site of Bridge 127 near the main signal, stop the train, and carry out the robbery of the Royal Mail carriage. Bruce and his team took their positions, while others remained at the bridge with the cars and the military truck. Bruce coordinated with everyone via radio, emphasizing speed and silence, and insisting that the money transfer should not exceed 15 minutes. As the train approached the preliminary signal, one of the gang members switched it from green to yellow. This caused the train driver to slow down, preparing to stop at the main signal, where Roger changed it to red. Once the train stopped, the gang members slipped behind the mail carriage to disconnect it from the passenger carriages. Some of them dealt with the driver's assistant, who tried to use the phone to alert the authorities. He was threatened and forced to remain silent after the carriages were separated. The pressure hose was reconnected to ensure that the engine and the mail carriage could operate. The driver was then able to move the two front carriages toward the bridge, leaving the rest of the train behind. When the carriages reached the bridge, the gang stormed the mail carriage, threatened the postal workers, and forced everyone to lie face down on the floor. They began transferring the money bags rapidly into the military truck. According to the planned schedule, the operation lasted about 2 hours and 15 minutes and was completed successfully before dawn. About 30 minutes after the gang left the scene, the driver and the worker slowly began to move, realizing what had happened. While the remaining carriages were still standing at the signal, the gang arrived at the farm and began moving the money bags inside the house. Bruce warned them not to leave any fingerprints and urged everyone to wear gloves at all times. As soon as they opened the bags, they realized that the amount of money was far greater than they had expected: £1,630,000, which is equivalent to about $90 million today. The gang began counting and dividing the money. Each person took his share, while they exchanged dreams and future plans ranging from opening restaurants to emigrating abroad to buying large houses. But Bruce began to feel uneasy about the consequences of the robbery. The media started reporting on the use of military vehicles, and police forces began launching large-scale search operations to deal with these concerns. The corrupt lawyer Brian Field was hired to coordinate the cleanup operation, burning the farm, and the trucks to eliminate any trace, including the clothing and equipment used in the robbery. Some gang members tried repainting the vehicles to make them look ordinary instead of military, but the results were unsatisfactory and the idea was abandoned. The gang stayed at the farm for several days, waiting for things to calm down and for police activity in the area to decrease. The gang members began partially cleaning the farm, burning some clothes and bed sheets, wiping down surfaces, and removing any obvious traces. The corrupt lawyer Brian Field was ready to send in a professional team to complete the full burning of the farm after the gang had left. New vehicles were arranged in London to transport the money individually to safe locations in order to avoid police detection. While passing through populated areas during this period, the British police launched extensive investigations, including searches of farms and properties near the railway lines, but they were unable to locate the gang or discover their hideout. News of the operation spread rapidly, and the Great Train Robbery became a famous case throughout Britain. The British police formed special task forces to track down the gang, while the gang members scattered and used safe methods to transport and hide the money. Bruce Reynolds remained the central figure, facing the investigations with intelligence and calm, while maintaining the secrecy of the rest of the gang. In later interviews, Bruce revealed details of the operation, explaining the meticulous planning, the cooperation between different criminal groups, and the use of simple tricks such as manipulating electrical signals and disguising themselves in military clothing. The authorities were unable to fully convict anyone, despite widespread suspicion, which made the operation one of the greatest and most famous robberies of the century in British history. Despite the success of the robbery itself, the gang's real mistake did not occur during the operation, but after it. Staying at the farm longer than necessary was the decision that changed everything. After the gang left, a cleanup team entered to burn the place, but they failed to complete the job properly. The police, who were combing the rural areas near the railway line, discovered the farm. Inside, they found what should never have been left behind: food remains, bottles, bags, and most importantly, fingerprints. Some gang members had not followed Bruce's instructions to wear gloves at all times, especially while eating and playing games. Those fingerprints were the disaster. The police compared them with existing records and began making arrests one after another. Many gang members were caught within weeks, while others attempted to flee the country. Bruce Reynolds himself managed to escape Britain. He moved between several countries, from Mexico to Canada. Using forged identities, he lived for many years on the run, married, and had a child during his time in hiding. But eventually, after years of living under pressure and fear, he decided to return to Britain, where he was arrested immediately. The trials were harsh. The British government wanted to send a clear message. Tampering with the Royal Mail was an unforgivable crime. The sentences were shocking. Some gang members were sentenced to 30 years in prison. Among the longest sentences ever given for non-armed crimes in Britain, public opinion was divided. Some saw the gang as criminals who deserved punishment, while others viewed them as clever men who carried out a bloodless crime and exposed weaknesses in the country as security system. Newspapers, books, and films turned the robbery into a legend as the years passed. Some gang members were released from prison, while others died behind bars. Bruce Reynolds himself lived long enough to tell his story, wrote his memoirs, and became a name forever associated with the Great Train Robbery. The story ended, but the legend did not to this day. The robbery is studied as one of the most precisely planned operations in criminal history, and as proof that success in execution does not necessarily mean escape from consequences. After the trials ended and most of the gang members went to prison, Britain was no longer the same as it had been before the Great Train Robbery. The British government treated the case as a turning point not only in the history of crime, but in the history of national security. The first major change was in the system of money transport. Reliance on postal trains as before was no longer acceptable. Armed guards were introduced, tracking systems were installed, and transport routes were completely overhauled. The Royal Mail, once a symbol of absolute trust, became an example that any institution, no matter how prestigious, could be breached. The British police also restructured their investigative units. Specialized teams for organized crime were created, and fingerprint databases were updated on an unprecedented scale. Many of the techniques used today in criminal investigations were originally driven by the embarrassment caused by the Great Train Robbery on a cultural level. The robbery became a story that captured the public imagination. Countless books, films, TV series, and documentaries retelled the story repeatedly. Some works portrayed the gang as clever anti-heroes, while others focused on the dark side of crime and its harsh consequences. After his release from prison, Bruce Reynolds was no longer a fugitive criminal, but a controversial public figure. He wrote his memoirs and spoke more about his mistakes than his achievements. He admitted that his greatest failure was not being caught, but believing that perfect planning could protect a man from human nature, fatigue, carelessness, and overconfidence. Notably, Most of the stolen money was never recovered, some was confiscated, some lost, and some disappeared forever, even today. Rumors persist about buried or hidden money that has never been found. The true story of the Great Train Robbery, it's not one of money, it is a story of ambition, intelligence, pride, and then downfall. It is a reminder that the greatest operations do not fail during execution, but afterwards, when those who carried them out believe the danger has passed. And so, the Great Train Robbery remains one of the most studied crimes in history not because it succeeded, but because it changed everything that came after it. And with that, we've reached the end of our story. If you enjoyed it, as always, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.